Hey Elevation family, it's Kim here, and I just wanted to take a minute to encourage you out of a verse that I've been reading in the New Testament. It's actually a story. It's the one where Jesus calms the storm. I'm going to read it out of Mark chapter 4, verse 37. So suddenly as they were crossing the lake, a ferocious tempest arose with violent winds and waves that were crashing into the boat until it was all but swamped. But Jesus was calmly sleeping in the stern, resting on a cushion. So they shook him awake, saying, "Teacher, don't you even care that we're all about to die?" Fully awake, he rebuked the storm and shouted to the sea, "Hush, calm down." All at once the wind stopped howling and the water became perfectly calm. Then he turned to his disciples and said to them, "Why are you so afraid? Haven't you learned to trust yet?" I think there are three things that are pretty obvious about this story, like right off the bat, right? The first is that there's this storm raging. Wave after wave after wave is just pounding this boat. The second is that Jesus is sleeping in the middle of it. I think there are two things that are true about anyone who's sleeping. The first is that they're silent, and the second is that they're still. Jesus was both silent and still. In the middle of this raging storm, he was completely unmoved by the circumstances that surrounded him. The third thing that's really obvious is that the disciples were freaking out. They were freaking out so much so that they literally shook Jesus awake. And they said to him, "Don't you even care that we're all about to die?" I think what they're actually questioning there of Jesus is two things: his character and his capability. They viewed his stillness and his silence as disregard, when in reality, they should have viewed it as a comfort. Because if Jesus is unmoved by a circumstance, why shouldn't we be? The thing that I think that this story is trying to get across to us is, although Jesus 100% has the authority, the power, the capability to calm the storms that are raging in our lives, I think he would much rather see us at a place where we trust him enough to sleep through them, where we trust in who he is enough to be at complete peace amidst the storms that are swirling around our lives. The other thing that I think is really interesting about this story is that when Jesus was shaken awake, he wasn't startled or caught off guard. He was still just at complete peace. Right? He was at peace while he was sleeping, and he was at peace while he was awake. And it was while he was awake that he spoke peace to the storm. And that tells me that you actually have to be at peace if you're going to be able to speak peace into the circumstances that are around you. There is no way that the disciples could have spoken peace to the wind and to the waves because they themselves were not at peace. They were spiraling. They were in turmoil. They had forgotten who Jesus was, and they had forgotten what he was capable of. And what's interesting about that is that the disciples had already been with Jesus up until this point. Jesus had already healed the sick. He had already casted out demons. They had already seen his power move. They had seen him at work, yet they were still questioning who he was. And I think that's why Jesus turns to them and says, "Why are you so afraid? Haven't you learned to trust yet?" And I think if we're honest with ourselves, if I'm honest with myself, I think I do the same thing. I think when the storms of life rage around me, I look at God and I say, "Don't you see what's happening? Aren't you going to do something about this? Don't you see that I'm about to go under?" When in reality, I should be saying to myself on the front end of worry, on the front end of anxiety, on the front end of fear, "Why am I so afraid? God, I have seen you move in my life. I have seen your powerful hand at work. I know what you're capable of. You have proven yourself faithful. Why would I doubt now?" I think there are some really practical ways that we can rein in those kinds of thoughts on the front end before the worry grips us, before the fear grips us, before we start to get freaked out. And I think it's the stuff that Pastor Daniel's been talking about in his series, The Slow Lane. It's simply reminding ourselves of who God is. Remind yourself that God is love and that there's absolutely nothing that can separate you from that love. Remind yourself that God is good and that he works all things together for the good of those who love him. Remind yourself that he is faithful and that even when we're unfaithful, he remains faithful because he cannot deny himself. Remind yourself that he is all powerful, ever present, all knowing, unchanging. If he ever once was, then that means he always will be. Remind yourself of who God is. Remind yourself of who you've seen God be in your own life. Go back to those holy moments when you've seen God move on your behalf. Let those things settle peace into your heart amidst the storms that are raging. Settle your heart in who God is. He's got you. He is faithful. You can rest secure in his promises. He is unfailing. There is no fault in him. He can be fully trusted and you can rest in him. Be encouraged today that he's got you and he will come through for you.